In 2002, a man named Jack Whitaker won $315 million in the Powerball lottery, one of the largest single ticket jackpots in American history at the time. Within 4 years, he was broke. Not slowly broke, completely broke. Lawsuits, bad investments, uncontrolled spending, and no system for managing what came in. The money was real. The plan was not. Most people hear that story and think it could never happen to them. But the mechanism behind it happens every single day, just at a smaller scale. Money arrives, life absorbs it, nothing is left, and without a plan, it does not matter how much is coming in. Here is what this video is: a 90-day reset, a specific step-by-step plan that takes you from wherever you are right now to having a working system for managing, saving, and growing your money. It's not a philosophy, not a motivational speech, a sequence you can actually follow. 90 days is roughly 12 weeks. That is enough time to go from guessing to knowing, from reacting to planning, from anxiety to something that feels a lot more like control. My name is Alex, and if you have ever ended a month earning a decent salary and still had nothing left to show for it, no savings added, no investments made, no clear answer for where it all went, stay with me, because that gap between earning and building is not a discipline problem. It is a plan problem. And I'm going to walk you through exactly how to close it. And it all begins with the same problem hiding underneath the stress, the confusion, and the conflicting advice. The 95% problem. Most people think financial stress is an income problem. It is not. It is a visibility problem. Think about how you actually make financial decisions day to day. You check your balance before a purchase. You get a rough sense of whether the month is going well or badly. You adjust on instinct. And most of the time, that instinct feels reasonable enough. The problem is that reasonable and accurate are not the same thing. And when you are making decisions based on a feeling rather than a number, you are not managing your money. You are guessing at it. Here is a data point that should stop you cold. A 2025 Federal Reserve report found that nearly 45% of American adults could not cover an unexpected $400 expense without borrowing or selling something. These are not people who are broke. Many of them are employed and college educated, earning decent salaries. The issue is not the income coming in. It is the complete absence of a clear picture of where it is actually going. That is the 95% problem in one sentence. Not a lack of money, a lack of clarity. Let me give you a concrete example of how this plays out. Marcus is 37, a project manager in Denver, pulling in $86,000 a year. Solid job, stable income. He contributes enough to his 401k to get the employer match, pays his rent on time, carries a small balance on one credit card, but nothing alarming. By his own assessment, he is doing fine. Then one afternoon, he actually sits down and adds up 3 months of bank and credit card statements. Not a rough estimate, the real number. His average monthly spend comes out to $5,200. His take-home after taxes and retirement contributions is $4,800. He has been running a $400 monthly deficit without knowing it for at least 2 years. That is close to $10,000, quietly drained from savings he thought he was building. Nothing dramatic happened. No crisis, no emergency, no bad decision he can point to. Just the slow, invisible leak that happens when you manage by instinct instead of by data. That number Marcus found, his average monthly spend, has a name. It is called your burn rate, and it is probably the most important number in your financial life that you have never calculated. Finding it is not complicated. Log into your bank and credit card accounts. Add up every dollar you spent over the last 3 months. Everything, subscriptions, groceries, dining, gas, to impulse purchases, all of it, then divide by 3. That single number tells you more about your actual financial situation than any salary figure or savings goal ever could. But burn rate is just the first number. To get the full picture, there are 4 others you need to know cold. Total debt, not a rough sense of what you owe. The actual combined balance across every card, loan, and line of credit. Write it down. Savings rate. What percentage of your take-home pay actually lands in a savings account each month? Not what you intend to save, what you actually save. Investment rate. Same question applied to investing. What percentage of your income is working in the market or a retirement account right now? And housing cost. A widely used guideline suggests keeping this under 28% of your gross income. If you are above that threshold, It is one of the most common and least discussed reasons people feel financially squeezed, despite earning well. 5 numbers: burn rate, total debt, savings rate, investment rate, housing cost. Most people cannot answer all 5 without looking them up. And that gap, between what they assume and what is actually true, is exactly where the anxiety lives. You cannot fix what you cannot see. That is not a motivational line. It is a mechanical fact. Clarity does not solve the problem on its own, but nothing else works without it. Every good financial decision downstream depends on knowing where you actually stand today. And once you have these numbers, you are ready for the part most people skip entirely: building a system so your money moves in the right direction automatically, without depending on your willpower to make it happen every single month. Willpower is a terrible financial strategy, not because people lack discipline, because discipline is a finite resource, and your bills do not care how tired you are. This is the part most financial advice completely misses. It tells you to spend less, save more, and be more intentional. All of that sounds reasonable until Wednesday of the third week, when you're exhausted from work, your checking account looks fine at a glance, and the path of least resistance wins again. The problem was never motivation. The problem was architecture. You were relying on a daily decision to do something that should have been handled once, automatically, and then never thought about again. That is the entire logic behind pay yourself first. And it is simpler than it sounds. Most people operate on what is left over. Money comes in, life happens, and whatever survives the month gets saved, if there is anything left, which most months there is not. Pay yourself first flips that sequence entirely. Savings and investments leave your account before you have a chance to spend them. You never see the money sitting in checking. You never make a decision about it. It has already gone to where it belongs. The behavioral research on this is consistent. When saving requires an active choice each month, most people do not follow through. When it is automated, the completion rate jumps dramatically. A 2025 study on retirement contribution behavior found that employees enrolled automatically in their workplace plans had participation rates above 90%. Employees who had to opt in manually sat closer to 40%. Same plan, same benefit, same people. The only difference was whether a decision was required. That is not a character difference. That is a system difference. Here's what the actual setup looks like in practice. Take Daniel, a 34-year-old graphic designer in Chicago, earning $68,000 a year. For years, he tried the leftover method. Some months, he managed to put something aside. Most months, he did not. He felt guilty about it constantly, which changed nothing. Then he spent one afternoon automating everything. His paycheck hits his checking account on the 1st of the month. On the 5th, an automatic transfer moves $400 into his investment account and $200 into a separate high-yield savings account. On the 7th, his rent, utilities, phone, and insurance all pay automatically. So what remains in checking after that, roughly $2,300, and is his to spend however he wants. No tracking, no guilt, no second guessing. The system handled the important decisions before he even logged in. 6 months later, he had saved more than in the previous 2 years combined. Nothing about his income changed. Nothing about his personality changed. The architecture changed. Now, how do you actually decide what those automated amounts should be? There is a framework worth knowing called the conscious spending plan. The numbers are not rigid rules, but they give you a useful starting structure. Roughly 50 to 60% of your take-home pay covers fixed costs: rent, utilities, insurance, subscriptions, and loan minimums. The non-negotiables: around 10% goes to investments. Not someday, not when things settle down, automated, every month, off the top. Another 5 to 10% goes to savings, emergency fund, a future down payment, a trip you're actually planning to take. That covers the foundation. And here is the part people do not expect. The remaining 20 to 35% is yours, completely. Spend it on whatever you want, no justification required, because the important work is already done. That is not a loophole in the system. That is the point of the system. Money that has already been directed toward your future has earned you the right to enjoy the rest without anxiety. The conscious spending plan does not ask you to want less. It asks you to decide once, automate it, and then stop fighting yourself every time you spend money on something you enjoy. When the system is running, something interesting shifts. You stop managing money reactively and start thinking about what it is actually building toward, which brings you to the part that makes all of this worth doing: learning how to grow your wealth So the money you are setting aside starts working just as hard as you do. Nobody gets wealthy by saving their way there. At some point, saving stops being the engine and starts being just the preparation. The real engine is something else entirely. You have heard of compound interest. Most people have. But hearing about it and actually feeling what it does to a number over time are two completely different experiences. So before we talk strategy, let me just show you the math, because the math is the argument. $400 a month. That is what a lot of people in their early 30s can realistically automate into an investment account without dramatically changing their lifestyle. At a 7% average annual return, a conservative estimate based on broad market index fund performance over the last several decades, that $400 a month becomes roughly $480,000 over 30 years. You contributed $144,000. The market contributed the other $336,000, more than double your input, generated entirely by time. Bump that number to $700 a month, and you're looking at just over $840,000. Contribute $1,000 a month consistently for 30 years, and you cross $1.2 million. You put in $360,000. The rest, $840,000, is compounding, doing what compounding does when you leave it alone long enough. That last part matters more than most people realize, leaving it alone. Here is where the story usually goes wrong. Someone starts investing, watches the market drop 12% in a bad quarter, and pulls out to avoid further losses. It feels like a rational, protective decision. It is actually one of the most expensive mistakes in personal finance. A 2025 analysis of retail investor behavior found that investors who moved to cash during market downturns and waited to re-enter the market underperformed those who stayed fully invested by an average of 4.3% annually over a 10-year period. That gap, compounded over time, is not a small difference. It is the difference between a comfortable retirement and a stressful one. Timing the market feels like a skill. It is mostly luck dressed up as analysis. The people who actually build wealth through investing are almost never the ones making the cleverest moves. They are the ones who set up automatic monthly contributions, stopped watching the daily numbers, and let time do the work. Let me put a face on this. Priya is 31, a nurse practitioner in Nashville, earning $94,000 a year. She started investing $600 a month at 28 into a low-cost index fund inside her Roth IRA, that is, an individual retirement account with tax-free growth. 3 years in, the market had a rough stretch, down almost 18% over 6 months. Her balance dropped noticeably, and she felt the pull to stop the contributions temporarily, wait for things to stabilize, and restart later. She did not stop. She kept the automation running exactly as it was. Like 18 months later, the market had recovered, and then some. Those contributions she made during the downturn, bought at lower prices, were now among the highest performing positions in her account. The dip she almost fled from turned out to be the best buying period she had experienced since she started. That is not a lucky outcome. That is what consistency looks like when you take the decision out of your own hands. The practical takeaway here is unglamorous, but important. Pick a low-cost, broadly diversified index fund. Set your monthly contribution to transfer automatically. Do not touch it when the market moves. Do not congratulate yourself when it rises, or panic when it falls. Check it a few times a year if you want. Otherwise, let it run. That is not passive. That is discipline. The investors who beat most active traders over 20-year periods are almost always the ones who did the least, most consistently. And when that consistency compounds long enough, something remarkable happens on the other end of the math. The investment income your portfolio generates starts to approach a number you will recognize, your burn rate. When those two numbers meet, everything changes. That moment has a name, and it is the entire reason this system is worth building. There is a number nobody tells you to calculate, not your net worth, not your savings rate, not your retirement account balance. A different number, one that, once you find it, reframes everything you have been building toward. It is called the crossover point, and it is the moment when the monthly income your investments generate equals your monthly burn rate. The moment those two lines meet on a graph, work becomes optional, not retirement in the traditional sense, not shuffleboard and early bird dinners. Optional, meaning you could stop tomorrow and your lifestyle would not change. You keep working because you choose to, not because the alternative is watching your savings drain. Most people have never thought about their financial life in those terms. They think about saving enough to retire at 65, or hitting some round number like $1 million, without ever connecting that target back to their actual monthly spending. The crossover point forces that connection. It is not an abstract goal. It is a precise calculation based on two numbers you already know. Here is how the math works. Take your monthly burn rate and multiply it by 12. That gives you your annual expenses. Then multiply that number by 25. The result is the portfolio size at which, assuming a 4% annual withdrawal rate, a figure supported by decades of research on sustainable portfolio drawdown, your investments generate enough income to cover your lifestyle indefinitely without depleting the principal. Run it on a real number. Say your monthly burn rate is $4,200. Annual expenses come out to $50,400. Multiply by 25, and your crossover number is $1,260,000. That is the target, not a vague aspiration, a specific calculable finish line derived entirely from your own spending. Now let me show you what the path to that number actually looks like for someone in motion. Trevor is 39, a logistics manager in Columbus, Ohio, earning $82,000 a year. His monthly burn rate, once he calculated it honestly, was $4,000 flat. Annual expenses, $48,000. His crossover number came out to $1.2 million. He had $94,000 already invested. He automated $800 a month into a diversified index fund at a 7% average annual return. His portfolio crosses $1.2 million in approximately 26 years. He will be 65. That is a reasonable timeline, but Trevor wanted to understand what would happen if he increased the monthly contribution. At $1,200 a month, the timeline compresses to 22 years, 61. At $1,500 a month, which required him to renegotiate one fixed cost and eliminate two subscriptions he had forgotten he was paying, for 20 years, 59. Three adjustments to his automated contribution, 6 years off the timeline. That is not a minor optimization. That is 6 years of his life returned to him. The crossover point also changes how you think about spending in the present. Every dollar reduction in your monthly burn rate does two things simultaneously. It increases the gap between your income and your expenses, which means more available to invest, and it lowers the crossover target itself because your lifestyle costs less to sustain. A $200 permanent reduction in monthly spending does not just save $2,400 a year. It reduces your crossover number by $60,000. The effect compounds in both directions. This is why clarity on your burn rate, which is where this whole system started, is not just an accounting exercise. It is the variable with the most leverage in your entire financial life. Small changes to it echo forward for decades. And here's the thing about reaching the crossover point that most financial content never addresses directly. The money is not the destination. It never was. The portfolio is a mechanism, and what it produces is time and choice, the freedom to work on things that matter to you, to stop trading hours for income out of necessity, to design your days around what you actually value, which raises the only question that math cannot answer for you. And that is exactly where we are going next, because building the system is only half of it. The other half is deciding what your rich life actually looks like once the system is running. At some point in this process, the question shifts. It stops being about the numbers and starts being about something harder to calculate. Because here is what nobody warns you about. You can build a perfectly functioning financial system, burn rate calculated, automation running, investments compounding on schedule, and still feel like something is missing. Not because the system failed, because you never decided what the system was actually for. That is the part most financial content skips entirely. It gets you to the mechanism and stops there. But the mechanism is not the point. The mechanism is just the thing that clears the path. What you do with the path is a different question, and it is the more important one. Let's back up for a second, though, because there is a mindset problem that derails people before they even get to that question. The idea that building wealth requires deprivation, that every dollar saved is a dollar you suffered for, that a rich life, by definition, means spending less and wanting less, and shrinking your lifestyle until the numbers work. That framing is not just unpleasant, it is strategically wrong. A 2025 study on long-term financial behavior found that people who described their saving approach as restrictive were significantly more likely to abandon their financial plans within 18 months than those who described their approach as intentional. Restriction creates resentment. Resentment creates rebellion. And financial rebellion almost always looks like a spending binge that quietly undoes months of progress. The alternative is not spending freely on everything. It is spending deliberately on the right things. Here's what that looks like in practice. Imagine two people with identical incomes and identical savings rates. One of them has cut everything: cheaper apartment than she wants, no travel, skipped every social event that costs money, and eating the same 4 meals on rotation to keep the grocery bill down. She is hitting her savings targets. She is also miserable. And 18 months from now, there is a reasonable chance she blows up the whole plan in a weekend. The other person has made different choices. She drives an older car and does not care. She has a streaming service she actually watches and canceled the 3 she forgot about. She spends $2,000 a year on travel because it is the thing she values most in her life, and she does not apologize for it. Everything else got cut to the bone, not because she was told to, but because she looked at her spending and realized most of it was not actually making her happy. Same savings rate, completely different experience of the process. One is surviving it, the other is living it. That is intentional spending, not a budget designed to minimize pleasure. A set of choices designed to maximize the return on every dollar you spend, measured in actual satisfaction rather than just volume. Now bring that thinking forward to the crossover point you calculated in the last section. When your investments cover your expenses and work becomes optional, what does the day after that look like for you? What do you do with the Tuesday morning you no longer have to trade for a paycheck? That question sounds simple. It is not. A 2024 survey of early retirees found that nearly a third reported feeling a loss of purpose within the first year of leaving work, despite having achieved the financial goal they had spent years building toward. The system worked. The why was unfinished. So the real work, running parallel to everything else in this plan, is figuring out what your rich life actually looks like, not in abstract terms. Specifically, what does a week look like when money is no longer the primary constraint on your time? What would you do more of? What would you stop doing entirely? Who would you spend more time with? These are not bonus questions to think about later. They are the reason the 90-day reset is worth doing in the first place. The financial system gives you options. Clarity tells you where you stand. Automation handles the execution. Compounding builds the runway. But none of it means anything without a clear answer to the only question that sits underneath all of it. What is the life you are actually building toward? Start there, because that answer is what turns a financial plan into something worth following. Here is what this whole thing comes down to. 95% of people feel financially stuck, not because they are failing, but because they are operating without a clear picture of where they actually stand. The anxiety is not a character flaw. It is the predictable result of making decisions in the dark. The system you have just walked through fixes that in a specific sequence. Clarity first, then automation, then growth, then purpose. Each step only works because the one before it is already in place. Skip the sequence and you are back to guessing. A few things worth carrying with you. Feelings about money are not data. Your burn rate is. Willpower is not a system. Automation is. Time in the market beats timing the market every single time. And your crossover number is not a fantasy. It is a calculation. You can run it today. One thing worth sitting with as you move forward. Every dollar you spend is a vote for something. The question is whether you're casting those votes deliberately or just by default. There is a related question that this video did not have time to answer. Once the system is running and the investments are compounding, how do you actually protect what you are building from the forces quietly working against it? That one is worth exploring next.